Is 1997 the most important year in wrestling? In many ways, I think it is. While the WWF wasn't making millions of dollars or winning the promotional war, it was when fortunes turned around because the product itself got so good. The mid-90s cartoon era was done. It was time to get serious. It's why so many people cite it as their favorite 12-month period too, and here's 10 reasons as to why that was when you sit down and binge watch the whole thing. Number 10, the changes were needed. Yep, we just touched on this. Fans were pretty much done with every wrestler also having an outside job for some reason, because don't forget every single character was a plumber or a dentist or a clown. Why can't wrestling just be our form of employment? It was also in February 1997 where Raw went 2 hours, and I think that told management they needed better stories and more in-depth personas, which basically meant we needed a whole new template. That continued on the 10th of March where we changed the name of the show and the set, and from here on, man, it was like watching a totally different promotion. Of course, this was a response to what WCW Nitro was doing, but we know the deal there. Oftentimes, the WWF needs a kick up the ass before realizing it has fallen behind the times, and this was exactly that. A reminder that they could do more. The fact that narratives started to change as well was just the perfect relationship. In many ways, the company has never looked back. Number 9, the landmark first. There was also more going on around this too, because on February 17th, the WWF did something it had never done before. It crowned a new world champion on Raw. This was Psycho Sid, who defeated Bret Hart on the show, and I tell you, fans were stunned. We all assumed the Hitman was headed to WrestleMania with the gold, but no. Even more crazy was the fact that Bret had only just won the title at In Your House the Final Four, which also was a result of Shawn Michaels losing his smile and giving up the belt. So all of this was mad. If you like stats, it took 5 years before the company made such a switch on Monday nights, whereas WCW had no issue with such things. It took them only 2 months after the birth of Nitro to do this. Randy Savage defeated Ric Flair back in 1996, so again, the World Wrestling Federation was watching. Number 8, there's some really bad production. So this is somewhat unfair as we have made leaps and bounds when it comes to technology, but I have a feeling this may have been the case back in 97 too. For example, the 3rd of February episode of Raw from the Toronto Sky Dome looked so bad, I thought I'd lost my eyes. There's so much grain, I felt like I was eating oatmeal, and when you jump forward a month to a show from Germany, my gosh, it's like it was recorded on a flip phone. And yes, if you were told about the flip phone in 1997, your jaw would have hit the floor. But given a lot of people have claimed that WWF has always been at the forefront of production, I think that may actually have only been true from the late 90s onwards. Just compare these to what the company was putting out towards the end of the year. It's night and day, which leads me to believe a lot more money was injected into this side of the business. Again, it was time to compete. Number 7, the weird ECW Invasion. I loved this at the time, and it was how I learned about ECW, so let's never change this. We also know why this went so nuts as well. Good old wrestling politics. For you see, the WWF felt like Sabu and RVD losing to Billy Gunn and the Road Dogg was fine, and yeah, sure, it would have been a year later, but this was when the New Age Outlaws had only just been put together, and let's be honest, there weren't much of anything. So as Rob and the Homicidal Maniac were at the top of ECW, this made no sense. They spoke as much, and they were right. As one Bruce Pritchard told Dave Meltzer though, you really think our guys would lose to theirs? Yes, otherwise an invasion angle is totally pointless. It's also strange Vince McMahon agreed to this in the first place because he was so anti-interpromotional warfare. Given WCW was kicking his ass though, he felt like he needed something. Sadly, this ended before it really started due to the above, but hey, it would kick off the relationship between WWE and Paul Heyman, which is still going strong today. Number 6, you need to see this rematch from WrestleMania 13, no less. It is a big one too, because on April 21st, Steve Austin and Bret Hart did lock horns again on Raw, and it's a street fight. This thing rules. Even today's over-the-top scraps could learn from this, because as usual, both guys wanted this to look as real as possible, and man, they tear into each other. It's vicious. Austin also refuses to release Bret's sharpshooter, plus later on we have ambulances getting involved. More people need to get their eyes on this, especially if you want an idea about the total feud between Steve Austin and Bret Hart. The whole thing is absolutely electric. Number 5, the crazy Intercontinental title program. WWF was actually quite smart with Steve Austin because they waited. There was no rush, he was going to be a success either way. Still, when you do tune into 1997, it is crazy to see the Rattlesnake as the Intercontinental Champion, and who is he feuding with? The Rock. think where they were going to be in a couple of years. As the Great One was becoming a superstar too, this was just awesome. And don't forget who was holding all of the top spots: Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, The Undertaker, Psycho Sid. The WWF was rammed with talent, but the guys just underneath were about to turn the industry on its head. You'll also see the famous angle where we do throw the IC belt into the sea, and when Steve just goes, "You know what, Dwayne, you can have this championship because I've got bigger fish to fry." And of course, he was talking about the World Wrestling Federation title. Number 4, the 22nd of September episode. So unlike today, Raw is a swift 2 hours in 1997, and on this date, to try and win the ratings war, the promotion booked one of the best 30 minutes in history. The date probably rings a bell, as it was the night Stone Cold finally dropped Vince McMahon with a stunner, but do you know what came next? That Falls Count Anywhere match between Triple H and Cactus Jack. You will have seen clips of this too, as it's when Cactus pile drives the game through a table on the entranceway, and it was back-to-back segments like this which turned the tide. WWF was playing the long game, knowing eventually fans would be back. And what do you know? With the statistics we have now, and the fact that WCW is dead, they weren't wrong. Number 3, the pre-DX New Age Outlaws. We've already talked about this, because yeah, they're really not that good. Now this wasn't their fault, because they honestly were just thrown together from nowhere. I mean, Billy Gunn was rockabilly before this. WWF didn't have a clue. They did have a few with the Legion of Doom, but the crutch of that was that Hawk and Animal were old, so it wasn't exactly deep. And honestly, you need to get to 1998 and the new DX when it clicked. That was their moment. I suppose this does make sense, because before all of this, they were just there. Their reason to be was D-Generation X, but you will be stunned if you haven't seen this early version. They are basically nothing. I don't want to be that guy, but I don't think they would have been that long for the company if it wasn't for the group in green. Number 2, the fabulous adventures of Rick Rude. History tells us that Rick Rude was so appalled about the Montreal screw job, he quit the WWF and was in WCW almost instantly. Now I do think there is some truth to this, but there's more to the story as well. Because 24 hours after the Montreal incident, Rick was on Raw, and he was saying how great Shawn Michaels was. Now the turnaround of these is obviously quick, so maybe Rude was just letting the thoughts roll about his brain, but I did not remember this, but it is correct. There he is. You do have to figure it was at least some of the reason, as he was doing alright in the WWF before he did become just another guy to jump the ship. Look, this happened a lot, and it was always fun, which is why you shouldn't get mad about it today. Number 1, HBK's dig that actually backfired. This actually happened on the 10th of November Raw we were just talking about, when Shawn Michaels was essentially going off the deep end. I mean, we were only hours removed from one of the most controversial moments in wrestling history. HBK also called Bret a dinosaur because he had gone to WCW, and that he would never dare beat up a 52-year-old man. Of course, this was a reference to the fact that Hart had famously punched Vince McMahon in the aftermath. The thing is, though, when you fast forward to WrestleMania 24, what was Shawn doing? Beating up a 60-year-old man as he took part in Ric Flair's first retirement match. I'm just saying. To be fair, Bret then topped in because he whooped a 64-year-old Vince at Mania 26, but it just goes to show. Watch what you say, because you never know what the future holds. Now, of course, please do like the video, share the video, and subscribe, and leave a comment below and let me know your favorite thing about Raw in 1997. And you see that on the screen, it is a video talking about retro wrestling. Why don't you click it? My name is also Simon from What Culture, and thank you for joining me as always. I hope you're having a terrific day, and I will talk to you again soon.